Thank you for listening in on our podcast in the series, Intergenerational Conversations on Climate. The podcast brings together voices from high school students and senior citizens from around New Brunswick to discuss their concerns about climate change in our province. The project is the product of Voices for Sustainable Environments and Communities as part of your province's Environmental Trust Fund at Work, exploring concerns and hopes represented by senior citizens and high school students. Climate crises appear in global and national news with increasing frequency and desperation. Voices of concern can be heard every day. Voices of hope are less common. How do our friends and neighbors think about the new climate? Let's find out. I'm Bruce Langus. I'm the facilitator, and I make up the questions, and I'll ask them of you. So,
I'm Reagan. I'm a student in Oromocto High School. I'm in grade 12.
And you live in Oromocto?
I live in Gary.
Oh, very good.
My name is Bob, and I live in Oromocto. I'm a senior citizen, as they would refer to us, retired. And, well, let's just leave it at that for now.
Very good. Very good. What we're looking at is, and what we'll be talking about is climate change. Climate change as it affects us here, climate change as it affects the whole country of Canada and the world itself, and also how it's going to affect us in the future. That's a big part of our discussion, to come up with some ideas and some answers, maybe. Okay, let's start out. I'm sure we're all bombarded with news about climate change every day. There's a new disaster, a new cataclysm somewhere in the world that's having a terrible effect on thousands or maybe millions of people. There isn't a lot of hope that emphasizes a lot of news that emphasizes hope. That's part of the problem, and one of the things that we'll be discussing. So the first question, I'll ask this of Bob. Whose climate information do you trust?
That's a strong question, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's do I trust government information, or do I trust manufacturers' information, or who is delivering the product, who's making money out of the product? It's a difficult process. I would like to think that I could be hearing some information from folks that don't have an economic vested interest in it that has some balance to it, but the balance to the information. But yeah, it's hard to find out or to trust information. You really have to listen to a lot of it and try to sift through it yourself.
Mm-hmm. Reagan, how do you figure out who to trust when it comes to climate information?
I would say nonprofits, anyone who doesn't have something to gain from the answer they give us. You can never be sure who to trust when it comes to information that will change how we act as a species, how we as humans interact with one another and the world around us.
I'll follow that up with, Reagan, do you trust Canadian government climate scientists?
The scientists? Yeah. What they choose to tell, what the government chooses to tell us is sometimes up in the air. But you know that scientists got into their profession for a reason. If they're climate scientists, they're passionate about it just like we are. But what the government chooses to release to us, that may be a different story.
Bob, do you trust Canadian government climate scientists?
Similar to what Reagan said, there was a time when I would have trusted them more. in a past life, some of my involvement was directly with a lot of government scientists. And but then there became a political time in the 90s, I would think, when the government decided that no more of these scientists could speak to the industry, and without everything being monitored or the information being sieved through. So following that, it became kind of questionable as to what you would hear, and it was what the government was choosing to let people hear, and which was unfortunate. But I would be trusting the government scientists if I could get to speak with them and listen to them.
You both mentioned politicians or government officials. Do they talk to government scientists? I'll ask that of both of you.
Well, I'm not sure how many of the politicians get to talk to the scientists. Politicians' staff and sort of what I would call the gatekeepers for the politicians, I think, have a lot of control over that. And the politicians may go in with a lot of, heart in the right place sort of thing. But I think that tends to get lost somewhere. It's, I think, a huge challenge for a politician who goes into it with a good heart to be able to maintain that once they are surrounded by the gatekeepers of what they have to do insofar as party and a long-term policies of party or government. So yeah, if they could speak directly with the scientists, I think maybe they'd have better information to rely on.
Same question to you, Reagan. Do political leaders talk to government scientists?
I don't know. I would say everyone goes into it with good intentions, whether those intentions be towards the planet, which they should be, or towards another motive. But I think that there's miscommunication everywhere, and that would be the downfall as far as that communication of them talking to the people who actually have information about it.
How do you think we could improve that? How can we harness sound government science, which we all agree on, with effective policies?
You would need to find a way to have an unbiased party, someone who has no ulterior motive and has nothing to gain except the health and well-being of our planet. That could be very difficult because everyone has ulterior motives, because in the end, everyone has themselves to worry about.
Bob, how can we match up sound, effective government science with effective political policies?
I'm reminded of David Suzuki, who I think is retiring shortly, which this kind of went through my mind as to, in my opinion, he's been a voice out there citing this information for years. And I think his information does make its way into policies, into government, as people are influenced by some of that. He becomes a source of information. But how are we going to find another David Suzuki, who is the next person to step forward and fill that role? Because like myself, I'm hearing what David Suzuki would be saying, and I'm sure people who would be going into politics are hearing the same kinds of things. And so we need some kind of influential persons like that to help bridge that, the policies and the individuals who are partaking in the government or participating.
Reagan, do we need high-power spokespeople to talk about sound science, or do we need lots of citizens to say the same thing?
I would say you need scientists to inform citizens and let them take it from there. To change the culture, the people, that change should come from within it. as far as I'm concerned.
Mm-hmm. I'll follow that up with this question, Reagan. Have you ever written to your MLA or MP urging climate action?
I have not. That's never been a part of anything I've done.
Any of your teachers suggest that you do that, or maybe have a class exercise in writing some of those letters and mailing them off in a bunch?
I believe it was mentioned that my environmental science teacher, the class that put me in this podcast, mentioned something along the lines of reaching out to MLAs for change in climate change protocols and things, but we never actually did it.
Mm-hmm. Maybe you can request that be done.
Maybe I should.
Bob, what do you think? Have you ever written to your MLA or MP urging climate action?
No, I've not. I guess I've just chosen the route to be involved in it as far as I could, and do my thing. And I guess maybe there's a cynicism about the politicians and how far you can influence them. But I agree that the actions by individuals and groups can influence. Now, they do say that there's a statistic of how many letters go forward, and MLAs, MPs will listen based on numbers. But I've always been kind of skeptical.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to add to what Reagan said about as the individuals. I kind of forget how that came about, but individuals participating and doing their thing. I think there was something you said about that. I think is important to do that at the grassroots level, and whatever you are involved in at the high school level, or at a working age groups or as seniors. Just each one doing their part on the local level can help influence.
Mm-hmm. So maybe even if you had a podcast of, say, teenagers and retired people, that could be effective to influence politicians. Okay.
Well, or even a podcast within the school environment of students that were inclined in that, that kind of discussion, then that can broaden the listening group and broaden the information pickup. So that's an influential base there. Because we all carry that experience forward through our own generation as we follow through our age groups. We'll carry that with us forever through. So if there's a chance to influence an age group that you will follow through with,
mm-hmm.
I think mm-hmm. that's a good project.
Yeah. On another slightly different point of attack, a large majority of Canadians now believe that humanity is responsible for climate crises. Instead of education, should we now be driving people to action?
One of the types of projects and energy-related involvement I had in a past life was sponsored by a government agency, Natural Resources Canada, in cooperation with a national industry group. And it did very well on influencing the industry of the day. And yes, there were incentives involved, and those incentives did help bring along some people. And as a consequence of that project that went on for a number of years, it altered building codes, and the field of influence of that information and demonstration has carried on and influenced a lot of what is involved in the construction industry today. However, as seems to happen in a lot of political environments, they feel there's been a sunset to that program. Whereas really at the point where they seem to stop supporting those types of programs, that is just when the public is starting to grasp onto it. If they had continued a while, then the more of the public would have been able to hang on longer to the idea and promote it, and it would move further. But the government will pull back at the point where it's just starting to get some interest. I think that's not only in the construction industry, it's in a lot of things.
Mm-hmm. Reagan, how do we drive people into action on climate?
I think you need to start by making them understand what's at stake. The planet is deteriorating before our eyes and nobody's noticing. Once they notice, we can start to make a change. Until then, they're not going to do anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you agree with that, Bob?
Yes, on a local level, when in the spring, when people see these video clips on the news of someone's property and house disappearing as a river reclaims its original path, for instance, and you see houses fall into the stream. Now, it might not have been the current owner that influenced the change in the stream, or even built the house there. But that is a dramatic illustration of something that's happening, and yes, the climate has affected those folks, and an unfortunate part of it is there is no mechanism to help that individual beyond saying sorry, kind of thing. There doesn't seem to be a vehicle to help to actually pick that person up and move them to the other side of the road, if you will. Mm-hmm. So, climate, I'm sorry I've lost your question, but...
that certainly answers it. What my question was, how should we be driving people into action? And I think you answered that. And
needs to be support.
Yeah. Reagan, who has more to lose from climate disasters, teenagers or senior citizens?
I would say objectively teenagers. We have a future going into this with jobs we have to do and a future, like a life in front of us to live. And a lot of things are going to change, and a lot of people aren't going to be ready for when they do. I would say the sooner we can get teenagers involved would be the better.
Bob, what do you think of that?
Yes, the younger generation has more to lose at this point. However, the seniors are being around longer now than they used to be, so there will be a time during that period where they are affected. And as we find now, there's resources are being stretched more and more to care for seniors, to help care for them, that in housing them and in keeping them heated and cooled and so on, the environmental change is going to have an effect on them in their vulnerable time. And yes, probably some of the things those seniors have done or not done over their course of their lifetime have influenced the condition they're in now. And we are all in now. And the same as what Reagan is saying is for younger people, what is happening now is going to be influencing their life as it goes forward. And yes, there will be changes. Nobody knows what those changes are going to be in that period.
Yeah.
So I saw an interesting little clip on Facebook the other day that was the time from, from 2022 to 1970 was the same distance from 1970 to 1918. I think that was the two numbers that were involved, but what are all the things that have happened to influence our thinking during those two time slots? and the range of change that has happened during that time. And it I don't know whether it's a question to come or has been, but it can become quite daunting to an individual. And I recall in my younger days, very younger days, there was the fear of the bomb and what we would do with that. But life changed, and that kind of went away. And the environment is something that is continuously changing, but you can get kind of depressed on that if you take on too much as an individual. And so you really do have to think about things on your local level and try to do what you can as an individual, and to not overextend what you can do and take more responsibility than you can actually handle yourself. And
Yes. Reagan, are your friends concerned or fearful about coming climate crises?
I think we all wonder what's going to happen, but I wouldn't say that anyone's fearful of it yet. It'll be when changes start to happen that people notice what's going to go on. Like teenagers these days, we take all of the basic precautions. You know, we don't buy plastic water bottles. We do reusable bags when we go shopping. But no one thinks deeper than what they tell us to do. We don't think about it and take actions for ourselves. We just follow the directions we're given.
Mm-hmm. Bob, what about your friends and acquaintances and family? Do you talk about climate change? Do you notice concern in their lives?
I wouldn't say that it's a subject of daily conversation, but certainly when issues present themselves on news and in the paper that something is happening, then you're talking about it. But just on a daily basis, I don't think it's really part of the conversation. But then again, there's things that you just do now that, like you mentioned about the bags, the recycling. There are things that we just do now that at some point in the past someone told us about it, and it just becomes part of our life. Like I carry around a reusable bottle, and so it's these things have become part of our life now, the point where we don't think about them. But yes, we're sort of prompted to go a little further when something, a disaster happens. But somebody does have to to hit you with it from time to time.
Yeah. But it's not part of day-to-day discussions with your peers.
I would say no. I can count probably on my fingers the amount of times my friends and I have discussed climate change.
Along that line, and political power, how would you feel about Canada giving the vote to 16-year-olds?
I would say no. I don't think anyone's well informed enough. Lord knows I wasn't at 16 years old to make a decision about our country and its future. I don't think anyone has enough education, maybe even at 18, to make that choice. But at 16 years old, that's grade 10, grade 9, depending on the person. Yeah, I would say no. I don't think that would be a responsible choice for the government to make. Like, yes, there are different opinions you may get, but I don't know if the different opinions would be worth the recklessness, maybe, or the misunderstanding of how things work in the world to risk it on that.
What about if there was a citizenship class that was mandatory for all 10th graders? Would that help the situation?
If you're going to educate them, I think it'd be fine. But the trouble would be there will still be people who don't understand, don't pass class, don't bother to learn. And then you have people at 16 years old who have barely lived making decisions about our country's future.
Bob, what are your thoughts on this?
That's interesting because I think the idea of starting with a citizenship kind of information would be good, but you could also say that there are a lot of folks that maybe are well beyond the age of 16 who you would wonder if they should have the right to vote or not. When it comes to being informed or how mature enough to make a decision. Have they lived a life that has provided them some experience to make some choices? So that's kind of a good point of debate, probably. But yes, I think there is need for some kind of I didn't know it didn't exist. Some kind of citizenship type of what your responsibilities are as a citizen of the town or country if you're going to be approaching the voting age. Then there are some responsibilities that you have to understand to be able to contribute to that. And if that doesn't exist, I think that would be a good place to start.
When Claire Ripley, who had taught school in Oromocto for 30 years, was just here, he said that there was a class in citizenship that was required of all students, but that was in the 70s. And for some reason it was discontinued. Mm-hmm. And I was mentioning that the province of Ontario has a citizenship 101 sort of class that's required of all high school students. So this might be that might be good. But then what about all the 70-year-olds who don't know, like mm-hmm. me or my peers who don't know much about citizenship? How do we get them up to speed? Anyway, I'll leave it at that. The 16-year-old question is certainly a question that's being discussed around the world. There are places who give the vote actively to 16-year-olds. So, and I think that you could make a point by saying that you give the vote to 16-year-olds and you remove the vote for 70-year-olds because they no longer have a productive role in the country. Well, except for running podcasts. I mean, but maybe. I don't know. These are questions to be talked about at Thanksgiving dinner and whatnot. Next question, Bob. Why are students not out in the streets every day demanding climate action?
Well, probably they're not as informed as we might think they are, and they've got a life to live of their own. They've got more immediate concerns of their own. I think that can be why are not a lot of people out in the streets complaining. It's because there are other things to be done on a daily basis that and I guess that's part of the problem is if people don't accept it as their problem, then it doesn't get addressed maybe as quickly as it should. But yes, we all have our issues that we carry with us from day to day, things that we have to do and just to carry on life, and we don't want to get bogged down in something else. So perhaps the climate change on a personal level is one of those things you can kind of put off until tomorrow because it's not going to be bothering me too much today. And then I don't know how much I'm going to be around tomorrow, so maybe I better be looking after today as well. Whereas, the students have a time vested interest in maybe being a little more active. But I think it does require some basis of information first to be able to have a base to go out and complain. So
right.
Or be in the streets.
Reagan, those students who are aware of the seriousness of climate change, why aren't they out in the streets demanding climate action?
I would say the same kids who are informed enough to argue on the issue are looking forward. I know most of my classmates don't have time to do much other than school, work, focus on moving forward. We're in grade 12 and we're trying to get our way through the year. And I know a lot of them don't have much spare time, but there's a level of, I think, disappointment when we see strikes and how much it takes for anyone to pay attention. People question whether standing outside arguing about it will actually make a difference, if it's worth spending your time doing that. It's also, I think some people worry about how far they're allowed to go. Teenagers don't get the education on how you can solve an issue within a system without causing an uproar. And I think a lot of people are worried that there's a line that they don't want to cross, but they don't know where it is.
Mm-hmm. Interesting point.
Yeah. And there's also the issue of the person who is doing the complaining, or the, I don't know the word, but professing that message all the time. And they get to the point, well, oh, here he is again, kind of thing, putting forth that message, because there are the other life issues that are needed to be addressed. So it's stop being invited to the party because that's your message is
sure. Yeah. This leaves me conflicted. You look at people like Greta Thunberg, who has made just a remarkable point of her very simple message of the climate threats and how they're affecting everybody, but especially young people, and how she's done this essentially single-handedly. Until now, there are dozens of youth leaders who are out saying the same things, but that's not all of us, so I don't know. I'll ask it a different way. Bob, what are some of the things you can do today to fight climate change?
Well, I guess just putting information that I feel I have out there, and like I mulch leaves in my yard rather than putting 80 bags of them out at the curb. And so, and put them in a bin and spread them around in a couple of years. So that's something that I do, and started doing it, maybe 10 years ago. But the trees are bigger now, so I'd probably have more than 80 bags. But there are those little things that we can do just to promote things at a local level, if we're not wanting to get out and become like her name skips my mind.
Greta.
Greta, yeah. Yeah, I'm drawing a blank here.
Reagan, what are some of the things that you could do today to fight climate change?
Again, you mentioned student activists, and I think having role models who are our age, Greta, there are others that I know people will look up to. It's important to have those role models because it shows the students of today that they can make a difference. But I think in the end of it, they just need someone to move them into action. And after that, once they are involved, they'll stay there, I hope.
Mm-hmm. Good point. That brings us to the end of our questions. I want to thank both of you for being here, taking part. You had some very interesting answers that we'll make note of. What I'm hoping is that high school teachers will look at this as a way of bringing this to their students and getting their students to do their own podcasts. maybe on some more concentrated question within the whole world of fighting climate change. But there are a lot of things that students can do, definitely. All right, thank you.